All right. And we are live. Good morning, everyone. Thanks all for joining. Let's see if people are streaming in. Yes, they are. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eitan. I'm the director of Legalese. I'm a lawyer, commercial lawyer by training, and entertainment lawyer, well, also by training. And today I run Legalese. We're a legal practice that deals specifically with the tech and creative industry. We offer a range of legal services from commercial to labor, IP, and a few others in the regulatory space. But today we are very lucky to be hosting a really interesting webinar for everyone. I've got two amazing guests, which I'll introduce in a second. I just want to give a brief introduction to the topic. So a lot of our work that we do is focused around the tech industry. And as we know, the tech industry, people are hot commodity, right? A company is only as good as the people that are working on it. One of the issues that local tech companies will have, and I mean, in many ways, companies all around the world have this issue, is getting and retaining talent, right? And there's competition around talent. It's not just enough to get someone working for you. You have to keep them engaged. You have to keep them happy at what they're doing. You have to figure out how do you get the most out of your staff so that they can give the most to your company. And is easier said than done. So that's the topic we want to explore today, right? Not just how you access talent, but how you keep them and how you protect your intellectual property and your work when you've got your talents, because the people that work for you essentially are the business. They're seeing the most crucial stuff in your business. They're the cornerstone of it. They're who your clients interact with. So there's a lot of value that the people that work for you hold in your business. So that's essentially the topic of today. So we're going to be looking at talent retention, and we're going to do it from two avenues. First, I'm going to introduce Rose Elcock. She runs VHRS, Virtue Human Resource Solutions. They've also got a really interesting digital product called Pulse, and she works in HR. She is from Ecuador originally, living in South Africa for 10 years, an entrepreneur, and I mean, it seems like everyone in town at this point knows Rose. Everyone I speak to somehow works with her company or with her. And she is going to be talking about her experience as a HR consultant, what she works with, how she works with her clients to retain talent and keep people engaged. So it's going to be quite practical and informative. We're then going to hand over to Christian Tabor-Raeside. Christian is the head of legal at Legalese. He's a lawyer of many years experience and works a lot with commercial clients and labor clients. Christian is going to be attacking this question from a labor side and looking at it in terms of, from a legal perspective, how do you retain your staff? How do you protect them, protect your work, and how do you keep staff engaged? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we're very happy to be hosting people here on Zoom. This webinar is also being live streamed onto the social media sites and LinkedIn. So really, really glad people could join today. It's also going to be hosted on YouTube afterwards, if anyone wants to go catch it there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Christian to kick us off.
Sure, thanks for that intro. I will share my screen for us here. All right. Cool. Well, Eitan's already kind of given you an idea as to who Legalese is. I don't know that that's necessarily something that needs to be repeated about what it is we do. Maybe just a little bit of background as to myself. As you can hear, I am American from my accent. I have been in South Africa for over 15 years, practicing for quite a while, did my postgrad here, have had the very beneficial experience of being exposed to multiple industries and spaces, specifically with regards to commercial law and how that relates to labor has also been something I've been very lucky to be exposed to throughout. Just kind of another thing I'd like to add in always before we start is just one thing with Legalese is we really like to be a part of the communities of our clients, right? And that's kind of why we're here today, right? We're trying to understand or try and impart understanding on this very important topic, because what it allows for is, you know, strength in companies and the communities that they represent. What's the goal for today? Well, as we've already discussed, it's tips on retaining talent. So the aspect that I get to talk about today is the fun, practical aspect insofar as the legal aspect is involved, right? When I say fun, sometimes it isn't fun. It sounds tedious, but it's important, right? And why is it important is going to be the first thing that we need to discuss, right? You need to root this in an understanding as to why take the time to do this. And then I'm going to give you 3 different tools, spaces where we can legally instill retention in our workforce. And that's going to come from your contracts. It's going to come from your company policies, and it's going to come from employee incentives. You'll see that we'll kind of break down the whys for contracts and company policies. But when it comes to employee incentives, I'm going to give you 4 examples. Now, these aren't universal solutions. They don't work for every company, but they may work for you. So please take note. Try and, if you can, write down when you get an idea that might pique the interest of your company, because at the end of this, hopefully what you have is some actionable points for your company. So why is this important? I mean, beyond what we already kind of know as an obvious answer, team cohesion is a really very, very vital point of any company, right? I luckily, being head of legal, get to run a team of lawyers that are fantastic. And I really, really cannot tell you how important it is to get it right for a family that you make in your company, and making sure that cohesion is one that's instilled in contracts and in the policies and in the company culture. Also the costs of bringing on new employees. I thought, not just monetary, but also the time and energy it takes to onboard individuals can be very expensive and can really be quite a hurdle for yourself if you're not creating the foundation that prevents you from constantly having to seek replacement in your employment. And then labor disputes. From my experience, I have seen quite a bit of disputes that could have been avoidable. Not all disputes are entirely avoidable, right? Let's not sugarcoat it. Some things do end up in dispute despite their best efforts. However, those best efforts have for sure prevented some unnecessary disputes from arising. And while we go through this, just remember that these 3 things, which are very practical insofar as your company is concerned, are the reasons why we're here and why this is important. So the 3 tools that I want to give you from the legal perspective is contracts. I know it's surprising that the lawyer in the room is going to tell you contracts are important. I am obviously biased, but I promise you it comes from a space of my own experience. And contracts don't have to be so tedious and boring. They can be conversations that need to be facilitated, right? So let's see that as a tool that's not too scary. Then we have our company policies. Now, company policies, we'll talk about, how they can be agile, how they can really, really assist with creating the identity of a company, and how you can really get buy-in by involving the teams. And then we're going to talk about employee incentives. And employee incentives are one of those areas in law, the beauty and pain, where it can just look so many different ways. I'm going to just propose 4 different options for you. We're going to discuss them. The goal is not that you become a lawyer at the end of this. So don't be afraid. Don't take a million notes. Just sit and listen and see if this applies to your company. And if it applies and you think it might apply, then kind of use that as a foundation or springboard to go forward. But you don't have to worry about becoming a lawyer at the end. I'm not issuing any LLBs. All right, so let's talk about contracts specifically. So why are the contracts important, right? When contracts are involved, what they allow for is certainty in what everyone's expected to do. They allow for clarity in the obligations and entitlements of everyone involved. They set boundaries. Boundaries and certainty, that doesn't sound so fun, but the reality is the alternative in their absence, right? Disputes are likely to arise, and those are a lot less fun, right? So what I always tell clients is that if you see contracts as just a conversation between individuals and it's facilitating what can be somewhat difficult conversations, right? Things that you don't necessarily want to have to talk about, but if you talk about it now, you set the foundation for if anything arises insofar as a dispute's concerned, as much as is possible, emotions can be removed from the dispute and words can be relied on. right? The clarity and certainty of those words that you did the work before can be the foundation for your discussion. And it allows for a much more productive space and hopefully a much more positive outcome. So if we talk about contracts, we have to talk about the content of those contracts, right? Now, I'm not going to go through every single clause that needs to be in it. You know, at some point, we've all been employed and we can picture those employment agreements, right? Or we've had employees, so we can picture those employment agreements. Visualize what's inside them. What I always start with is there must be compliance with the applicable legislation. The reality is, by you not including it in an agreement does not mean that you are no longer bound to it. The way in which labor law works, specifically with these legislations, is that whether or not you have a written agreement between each other, you are bound to these terms. So give yourself the gift and your employees the gift of communicating clearly what you're actually entitled to do and what you're not. It sounds like, you know, I don't want to put in all this leave because maybe they'll take advantage and take it all. The reality is everyone's entitled to take it anyway, whether you put it in or not. So make sure your contracts have what the legislation permits, and it allows for a more open discussion and a better transparent relationship with your employees. Clearly defining the roles and responsibilities has quite an obvious benefit, right? Because then the expectations can be quite clear, there can be no misunderstanding, but I want to caution everyone not to be too prescriptive, right? These don't have to be things that are written in stone, and they don't have to be things like, I want this many things done in a day or in a week even. It can be more general expectations, right? But what it allows for, again, is a conversation about, this is what I expect from you, this is what you can expect from me. And if anything were to go pear-shaped, you can at least revert back to that promise you made with each other when you made this agreement. Leave is an important one, right? Everyone cares about leave, no matter what. You know, you got to have that conversation. And the thing is, the law already gives you the minimums, right? So those minimums should always be in your contracts. Everyone should understand exactly what is their entitlement, how it works. And it really does benefit you to have that on the table, because then everybody can do exactly what is expected to them when it comes to leave, and there's no questions about it. Also, it's an opportunity, and we'll talk about later, where you can really make yourself stand out by giving better leave policies than other companies. And benefits. Benefits is another one that isn't necessarily, or it is one where it isn't necessarily required of you to include, right? Benefits is your own prerogative as an employer, and it depends on what your company can do and has available to them. But when you include things like travel, or phone, or internet, you know, those benefits, one, make you stand out from other companies, but also, depending on what your industry is, might be vital to the success of your company. So not only will it be an incentive to retain employees, but it will also help in the success of your business. The goal here, as I've mentioned before, and I will reiterate quite a few times, is that we want to avoid confusion and misunderstandings, right? These exercises allow for an understanding throughout the relationship of the employment. Let's talk about company policies. So company policies versus contracts. What is the difference, right? So we talk about leave, and there can be a leave policy. Well, a contract, right, is one where you and I've had this conversation. We, you know, have talked about what's important and what's expected, and then we sign, seal, and now I'm working for you. If you want to change that, it's not a simple amendment process, because we've already agreed to it, and now we then must get back to the table and agree on that. When it comes to a policy, they're much more agile. They're living, organic documents that speak to the company culture. They reflect the company's identity, and that's what you want them to be, right? So sometimes you can start off with 1, 2 policies, but as you go on with your business and needs arise, you and the team can collectively decide that there needs to be a new policy instilled. And that allows for a lot of agency to be included. People have buy-in on that, and it really helps paint the picture, which is the goal here, of what your company's identity is. So let me just give you some examples of policies, right? So you have your remote work policy. That's obviously become incredibly important these days. It needs to be clear what exactly is expected with regards to remote work, whether it's entirely remote or partially remote. Having it clearly set out is very important for everyone involved. Use of AI is a really, for me, quite fun, maybe geeky fun, but like very interesting area for which everyone should be really considering. If you can optimize the way in which your company operates by utilizing artificial intelligence, maybe what you should be doing is seeing how that would work for your company, how it would be best communicated to your employees, and get a policy around that. Dress code is an obvious one, right? Depending on what your industry is, there may be a specific standard for dress code and expectation. You want everyone to be on the same page. Having that policy allows for clarity in that regard. And then I said here kind of safety policies. And I think these are really, the traditional ones, but they are so incredibly important. Discrimination, sexual harassment, and complaint hierarchy. They really allow for individuals to feel seen and safe. They allow them to know that they are valued by the company and that their fears may be one that are seen and not overlooked. So having something like this may be a difficult conversation to have, but it's one that really can make those who feel vulnerable feel safe in the company. And that's a way to really allow for employees to want to be with you and not someone else. So I just want to say before we jump to incentives, it's very important to not overcomplicate things. You got to find a balance, right? If you're overly prescriptive, what may end up happening is the culture you create is one that is very rigid and robotic. You want it to be organic. You want it to speak to the identity of the company, but also to the workforce that you have. Let them see themselves in the policy. If you don't do that, the culture that you create can be very contagious very quickly, and it won't be doing what was intended, right? Which is giving this clarity, but also giving this agency to your workforce. So the solution I suggest, and something that we do here at Legalese, is we really do involve the team in creating these policies and trying to see what's important to everyone who's here, and also how to communicate it best. So the final tool that I just want to kind of go through with you are these 4 different examples of employee incentives. Now, employee incentives can be structured in so many different ways. Lawyers love to create legal fictions, and these are kind of areas where they may somewhat be a legal fiction because you're creating them in the agreement, but as you'll see, they can be very practical and beneficial. So they're not universal solutions. They don't work for everyone. It depends on your company, depends on the workforce, maybe even the stage at which your company's matured at. They have high risk, but they also have high reward, right? So high risk, if you think about, one of the examples that we'll go through is equity. So sharing in the ownership of your company can be risky, right? Shares have specific things that are, attached to them that allow for entitlements. And the risk there is that you get people involved who, now have a say in the decision room, where before you were doing it on your own. But it could also be high reward. You really could get people very much incentivized in the success of the business because they are part of it. So just rule number 1, and this isn't surprising since I've been talking for a while, and I think I'm quite clear on this stance. It needs to be in writing. The contracts that you create here, the actual terms that create these structures must be clearly written out. They must be, they can't just be handshakes, and they can't be just promises, right? That's going to work counterintuitive to the whole idea of how do we retain employees. So the 4 examples are bonus systems, profit shares, phantom share structures, and equity. Don't worry, the terms can be scary. The concepts can be alien. This isn't for you to fully walk away from here and knowing exactly how you're going to structure for your business, but it's just to kind of pique your interest in the possibilities of creating different mechanisms for incentivizing employees. First one, bonus structures. And this one's quite simple, right? Everyone knows the classic 13th check kind of structure, or, what you could create is something where there's bonuses on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. How that looks, the frequency of it, and the event that it's hinged on can be entirely specific to your own company, to your own goals. One thing that I think is really important about this and very beneficial is that it can be attached to performance, right? So you can have a conversation about performance, you can create realistic goals, which then can incentivize the success of your workforce individually, but also your company collectively. Profit share. So profit share is also quite an interesting and versatile model insofar as, you can isolate specific areas of profit, right? So maybe people only share in the profit of a specific product, which incentivizes the sale of that product, right? Or it could be something that is, an annual profit. So then the whole year, everyone's really rallying together to try and seek that target. Very important components to deal with here is the definition of profit, whether it isolates specific areas. We had a client who they wanted to incentivize their sales team, and so they did profit share for regions, right? So the region for which they worked, and just that one region really incentivized the teams in that spaces to work together to find success in their territories that they've been allocated, right? And then reporting mechanisms. The whole point here is to really be able to have these relationships that are transparent and positive with your employees. And so reporting mechanisms may be important here, just so that everyone's aware of how the profit's been calculated and can kind of give an honest background to this incentive. And also very importantly, not to be the naysayer, but you must always think about when termination happens, what the consequences are. The whole point today is to discuss ways around avoiding termination of employment, right? Because we want to retain employees. But when creating these structures, you gotta go into the room with kind of worst case scenario as well as best case scenario. Also, shock horror that it comes from a lawyer to have that conversation. But the thing is, being risk averse in this area really can allow for you to take kind of courageous steps forward in this high risk, high reward model. Phantom share schemes or structures. So a phantom share is a funny term, right? But what it allows for is a legal fiction where someone doesn't actually hold equity. What they hold is a right that has arisen out of an agreement with the company. So the company then agrees on how the right arises, on what event it arises, how it looks. So there's a whole set of rules that ends up in an agreement here. It can be incredibly versatile because you can make it, inclusive of decision-making or not at all. It can operate similar to that of a share where, dividends get declared, but it doesn't actually affect your shareholding. It doesn't affect your existing shareholders. And you don't need to enter into a shareholder agreement. As we get into the equity discussion next, a shareholder agreement is going to be really vital when you're bringing on employees and making them shareholders. So finally, we get to the equity, which is, probably a very traditional space to be in. Getting people to be part owner in the company is one way to very much incentivize them in the success of the company. There are different ways in which you can do this. You can have pools where people participate in the pool that's owned. So for instance, employees could own 10% of the shares of the company. but the actual employees themselves don't own those shares. They're just participants in the pool. But then you can also get traditional equity models where they do become holders of the shares in their name. It's really important here to remember that shares just cannot be very easily taken away. You know, equity isn't something that you can just give and then take back, you know, if things don't go well. Transactions result in tax consequences. So that might, you know, if you have a workforce that is adverse to tax consequences in this regard, you know, that might be something that's a hurdle when using this incentive. And you're going to want to formalize shareholders agreement. You know, maybe right now you're the sole shareholder, so you don't have a shareholders agreement. But the moment you bring on your shareholders, even if they're your employees, maybe especially if they're your employees, you make sure that there's a shareholders agreement which regulates the relationship between yourself and other shareholders. And then again, the consequences of termination of employment is going to be important here, right? Because the whole intention for the equity being shared is that you incentivize retention of their employment. But if, for instance, they leave, what are the consequences in that regard? So just kind of to wrap up all of this law that we've discussed and I've kind of spewed towards you, as an exercise, just write down what is your desired goal, right? This is something I always say to clients. The thing with law is there are so many ways to get from A to B. And what you really need to know is where you want to go so that you can tailor the steps in that direction. It also helps limit the spaces or the options, because now you know where you want to go and you want to make it the most efficient and positive experience. And so starting off with getting that idea, not just the retention of employees, right? That's the main goal. But how do we want to retain them? What are you willing to do? Share in the profit, create bonuses, you know, it's an important exercise. Then once you've considered what your company needs and how your workforce is structured, I highly recommend seeking professional assistance when structuring these agreements. It isn't something that, you know, is quite like a natural way of necessarily speaking or thinking. It's something that requires kind of brainstorming. And yeah, I highly recommend utilizing and leaning on the assistance of a professional in that regard. And then, yeah, I think we'll do questions after Rose. So maybe save those if you have any. And yeah, I will stop sharing. And Rose, you can go ahead. I hope that was useful for everyone.
Thanks so much, Christian. That was really interesting and good and very thoughtful. It's quite a lot of content in there. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in that, having a rewatch of it, or if it'll be on YouTube for us to go through it. There's a lot that's in there. And if you've got questions, Christian is available to chat.
You can always email me.
Brilliant. I actually realized Rose was supposed to go first, but so I messed that one up. But sorry about that, because I hope you didn't have to jump into it quickly. So next up is going to be Rose from VHRS. As I said, Rose has been working in HR for over 10 years, has a lot of experience in dealing with tech companies and dealing with talent acquisition and retention. And Rose is going to tell us a little bit about how we would approach this from a practical side. Thanks, Rose.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. And it was really lovely to hear Christian speaking about retention from a legal point of view. There is so much in HR that's kind of threaded with the way the legal work gets done, so we can, you know, arrive to the desired outcomes. So it was actually great to see his presentation first. Great. So we'll be speaking about the same subject, retaining talent, specifically for the tech industry, from an HR point of view. And then, as well, as I said, we're going to kind of mention the legal aspects that we like to bring from HR practices as we go along. There we go. That's full screen. Great. So when it comes to HR, something that we like to do for when we start an HR department for any company is really shape the employee journey. The way we see the employee journey taking place is that you have practices that relate to the acquisition of your talent, practices that relate to the retention of your talent, and then practices that relate to the termination, right? Terminations will usually be a kind of a natural way to go about it, which is through a resignation, or it could be through legal proceedings. But in any case, it's a way out of the business, right? So we're going to touch base in the three main areas of designing this employee journey from an HR point of view. When it comes to acquisition of talent, something that we love to see in HR is that, yes, there are these really important items that relate to the legal work that's required. For example, getting a good contract in place, getting good policies in place, very much understanding what type of benefits we can offer. And then also from an HR point of view, we make sure, for example, when it comes to CTCs for different roles in the company, we will always want to benchmark to what's happening in the market, mainly because you want to be fair, of course, but also because you want to see that also as a competitive advantage if you are to reward well when it comes to a CTC, right? And then something that we also see from an HR point of view is that the moment you induct somebody into your business, once the person has been recruited, it could start with an offer letter, it could start with offering a contract, straight on. But the fact that HR needs to have a very well-designed process, very itemized in terms of what needs to happen. The reason for that is not because we're obsessed with, following checklists. It's because of this concept that says there, the mnemic footprint. That's something that I learned back when I was studying my psychology degree. And it has to do with the fact that the very first times that you go through an experience are going to shape that lasting experience that you have with that particular business, right? So if you are to get, let's say, go through an interview process for recruitment, if the person that was going to interview you is late, or is not asking relevant questions, or any sort of experience that is going to leave a little bit of this company, they weren't really that aligned to me as a candidate, that is going to leave a long-lasting impression, let's say, if you are to be recruited and work for this company. So that's why a structured induction and also probationary procedures, so everything that has to do with the acquisition of the talent, has to be impeccable from the point of view that we are creating first experiences for everything that we're taking this person along. So that's why we always recommend a very well-structured acquisition process. Now, when it comes to retention, what we usually recommend is that companies need to give feedback to employees. So it's not only through let's say the probationary period, which is still part of the acquisition process, where we are also legally bound to give feedback because probation is contemplated in the legal framework. But also once the person has finished the probationary period, we still encourage for weekly feedback. By weekly, we mean a certain rhythm, right? So we are all very familiarized with the quarterly rhythms because those match the kind of business quarters. But what we have seen from the consultancy point of view is that quarterly rhythms do really help reflect on how the business case has evolved during that quarter. But at the same time, when it comes to individual growth, employees we see need more frequent feedback than that. Also because if you are to wait for quarterly feedback, it means that you probably were not capable to remember everything that happened in a quarter in order to give performance feedback. While if you are to reflect on weekly chunks, you will, as a manager, probably remember much more of what happened during that week to give feedback. So from a performance point of view, in order to retain talent, we always recommend managers to be given feedback in any sort of structure, but on a weekly basis. And then we always say that we like HR to be involved or to have oversight of this feedback. And funnily enough, that's not something that we see a lot in companies happening, that HR will structure whatever performance management takes place, but not be part of it. So we're more focused on the structure, making sure that it happens, but not necessarily being part of those conversations. And there is so much that HR can offer being part of the performance conversations. Usually HR has some sort of background of when it comes to facilitation techniques, or knowing how to align people, or we should embody the cultural values of this business. So if we are part of that conversation, there is so much that we can actually be providing for a valuable conversation to be taken place. And also, what we tend to see is that when it's time to have the harder conversations, when we need alignment, where we are not seeing necessarily output that we are required to see for the business, managers, it's only natural that they may shy away from giving that feedback to avoid confrontation. So HR can play a really supportive and strategic role to that manager to be able to have, to allow for these two parts to be speaking, elaborating, making sense, understanding each other, and know that, okay, we either have alignment or misalignment, but we are seeing it, we're talking about it. The moment you as a third party, as HR, can do that for every person in the business, then we know that you're being strategic when it comes to your HR practices in order to retain talent. Now, that is great for HR to be part of that process, but something else that HR needs to obsess about is in the reporting of this exercise. So what we like to do in particular is that once we close up the quarterly review, the weekly review, whatever process you have in place, we want to make sure that we have a very good visual representation of where everybody is in your business. So then HR can very much keep accountable for the fact that we are on top of all the employee journeys in the company. So we like to use a tool which is called 9-box metrics. And what this does is it's very much a visual representation of the people that are thriving in your business and the people that are falling behind, either from a performance or a conduct point of view. And when I mention these two things, performance and conduct, it's not just a selection or a choice that we have. It's more us falling back on what the legal framework. We would kickstart legal proceedings for termination if things are, to come to worse, which HR always needs to think of kind of worst case scenarios, is that you will either be addressing a conduct or performance. So that's why when we do performance, which is a more proactive, it's not reactive, it's really wanting to encourage and foster, a good work environment. We will still do it with the framework that's required should we need to engage in legal proceedings. It makes it easier for everybody. We're all speaking the same language. Nothing will come as a surprise. And when I say these things, it's not so much for the manager or the company to back themselves up, it's to create the right awareness for the employee, to say, listen, we are seeing this, let's have that discussion. And, this is how we are kind of, we show you we make it visible for you. So then you as an employee as well know where you are at and know what can happen if we are not to align, right? So all the steps that will happen. So I always like to create awareness. Listen, if we don't come right here, we will have to take you through a counseling process. One counseling could take to a warning, another counseling to a written warning. So we create all that awareness. And obviously I like to say, we are not there yet, but I need to create this awareness so you know where you stand, right? So again, the visual reporting of whatever performance management you have in your company is key for you as HR to align with your executive team to say, this is how we're being, keeping ourselves accountable for everybody's employee journey in this company, which will ultimately have the effect of you knowing how to retain your talent. Firstly, because you are identifying the talent you want to retain through an objective way, and also identifying who you don't want to return. And that may sound a little bit like surprising, but the reality is that for business, in order to retain talent, half of the work is understanding who you don't want to retain. Because we know the saying that one bad apple can, I don't remember the saying now, but can kind of contaminate the whole tree. And that happens in businesses. If you have someone with bad attitude or it's just a poor performer, that will have a knock-on effect, either of misalignment, where, this person will, either have, talk about these things and other people may share experiences or things like that, or the other way where this person will be ostracized. So as a business, we just need to know that we need to work also with people that are falling behind in order to keep our company in top shape. Great. Now, what happens after you do this really nice reporting is that still actions need to take place, right? Because it's really not only about, cool, we know who the high performers are and who the people that we need to address for poor performance or misalignment with conduct. We actually need to take action on this. And here we follow very much, again, the legal framework. If someone is not performing, we will initiate a poor work performance review. If someone is not culturally aligned, we will initiate counseling sessions that will have the knock-on effect of a warning. If we, this is a little bit of a different one, but you can also may come across people that are going through tough things in their personal lives, and they could be going through, it could be depression, anything that has to do with life work and balance. We might see also mental illness. And what happens with that is that for mental illness, you could consider incapacity if it comes to a point where the performance is not up to scratch. But generally speaking, what we would do before we consider incapacity is give this person a space to talk and work through whatever is happening, you know, in their life, in their personal life. And that is not something that the business will have disclosure to. It's just really given a resource, and that helps for retention, really. If you can tell someone, listen, we have this space, if we are seeing that you're going through something, we could give you a space to talk to a professional, right? So that is something that we love to offer as well. And then when things are going really well for people, in order to retain them, we could consider recognition when it comes to changes in CTC, career development in place to promote them to different roles in the company, or also structural changes, be it if you have, for example, a recruitment need, you first try recruiting internally for that position. So you should be doing kind of promotions or lateral moves in your company, and that really keeps people motivated. The moment your company, your people know that the moment there's a need, HR will first come internal to see if anybody wants to apply for a role. There's a really nice sense of, I can grow in this company because I will always know what's there available. It's really bad when employees know that you are recruiting externally without telling them first. It's a very much a demotivating factor. So that is something that we always recommend for companies to do, to once you have how everybody's doing in your business, to know that there's certain actions that will happen stemming from that exercise. So that's very much how you close your retention part of your talent retention. When it comes to exits, as I mentioned in the beginning, HR will consider it's either because it's an organic exit, a resignation, and it could be a termination. So when it comes to terminations in particular, and this is very much when now things exceeded the HR internal capacity of, we follow the legal framework, but now we do need to involve a labor attorney at this stage in order to get these processes going. Firstly, you want the peace of mind that things are being done, again, with the legal framework in mind. And also because it is best practice, right? So it could be getting into an inquiry space where this is related to performance. A poor work performance review took you to the place where you need an inquiry to be held. The company is very much going to be saying that we've done this process, we have now proof that there's poor work performance, and you held an inquiry with a chairperson, which is usually the labor attorney, that will handle that process. When it comes to hearings, this is related to conduct. You will have gone through your counselings with written warnings, final written warnings, and then you get to a space where you get a hearing, and again, you'll have a chairperson, which is usually a labor attorney, to very much have this very structured hearing session. And then we have the incapacity, which is a third route, which is, it could be about mental illness being identified or physical illness being identified, that for operational requirements, the person is not meeting the demands of the job. So again, you will involve a labor attorney. By the way, when I say involving labor attorneys, I like to involve labor attorneys way before you come to this stage. And the reason for that is because you want to be doing an informed process. So from the moment that you have someone in performance and you already see some misalignment, that's where you ideally will want to start engaging to make sure that you are following best practice when it comes to our legal framework. Other things that relate to retaining talent that we see are very successful for companies, especially in the SA context, is praising your entry-level employees. You can definitely tell when you go into a company, if entry-level mean, for example, and here it says, sales team, customer service, anything that's entry-level, when the employees that are on entry-level are being recognized and are being rewarded, and they're just on top of mind of everybody in the company, that generally speaking creates a great working culture. When you go in a company and then you see that the sales team, customer service, or any entry-level position is kind of, like in the corner on the side, then there's something about that does not sit well with a company culture. So a great tip there, if you want to foster a great company culture to retain your talent, make sure your entry-level sales team, customer service teams are being recognized and really get praise and attention from everybody in your company. Talking business to your employees, that's something that we found that, we usually do that in one-on-ones in our performance sessions. I usually like to start those by giving kind of a state of affairs from the company side to say, how did the company perform? Before we start speaking about your performance. That really helps to link the individual's performance to a company performance, but also we want to empower people with everything that they need to know from their industry and their company. As many numbers as we can disclose is going to be the best tool that any company will have to retain talent, because it means that you're walking the journey with your people. Sometimes companies say, they don't want to disclose, for example, like hard numbers like revenue or profits. You could speak about margins, you can speak up in percentages, and as long as people can get an idea of how the business is doing, is the business in growth stage, is the business pivoting, is the business shrinking, all of that we need to make sure employees know. If they don't know about these things, they will hear things, but then it's unclear and it will not create a great working culture. People are going to start looking for jobs elsewhere. Build your company story with your employees is very much to the point that I was just speaking about. And then, yes, it is a no-brainer when a company is doing well in some sort of way, which Christian, you touched base on, be a benefit scheme, bonuses, whatever it is that it's good to share. If your company is doing well, your employees know about this, but they don't feel the consequences of this, there is going to be a question mark around, is this the right company for me? If they have involvement in the growth of the company, something needs to come back. And sometimes it doesn't need to be disclosed what type of structure, although it is ideal, like that's full transparency. The advice that we give is that whenever you share, to have the one-on-one sessions to explain some sort of thought process that went into, like, this is what we have to share. Thank you for your collaboration. So that's kind of what we see works best. This is a little bit of a summary of everything that we spoke. So I'm not going to go through this because it's a little bit too much, but it is, the key things that we see work for retention. And something that I always like to touch base when it comes to these things is that this is the pyramid of Maslow, the needs of Maslow. And it's something that you study back in psychology, and it works. It really does work when it comes to understanding the human needs and how that translates into what a company and HR can work on in order to retain talent. Like there's no two ways about it, that if you have any sort of physiological need that you see there, for example, sleep, shelter, food, if any of those things are not right, you're not able to go into the next level, which is personal security, employment, resources, health, right? So that's how this pyramid is built, that the first thing needs to be covered in order for a person to be able to go into the next level. And if you look at employment as we know it, safety needs with employment sense of connection with love and belonging, respect, recognition, freedom. Like work is everywhere, you know, it touches base on all of these. So if you are part of an HR department, this is paramount that you know what's necessary for a person to feel secure, loved, recognized. And if you work with this in mind when you design your practices, you really are going to go right in order to retain your talent. I always say, if the basics are not right, like pay or, you know, discuss freedom, like work remote policies or things like that, then don't come up with the, you know, like the, I don't know, team building, whatever, because the basic was not covered. So you're not going to retain that person. So I always say, I rather don't go and design like things that are more on the kind of, you know, higher up in this pyramid. Let's get the basics right, and you will build a great culture in order to retain your talent. I hope I didn't go, you know, like over time, but I'm really passionate about the discussion.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Rose. That was super interesting. And I love how you bring a real human element to the whole thing. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what people are in our organizations. They're humans. We're just about out of time, but I'm just going to see if there are any questions that anyone has or wants to ask just before we wrap up. Well, there's no questions in the question and answer, nothing in the chat. Okay, well, if anyone wants to ask, then we're still here for another minute or two. But that's great. I'm going to take that talks are really clear and answer all the questions in doing it. But thanks so much to everyone for joining. That was really interesting. Thank you to Christian, head of legal at Legalese, and Rose from VHRS. Appreciate you both. And if anyone needs to get in touch, please do. We'll put all the contact details out to whoever registered. And yeah, we do these. This is actually the last of this webinar in its current format. So now you know, we'll be launching a new webinar format in the coming weeks. And so stay tuned and watch this space. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.